The Medieval Feast. Welcome, lords and ladies, to the Royal Court of the Museum of Antiquities. We are very pleased to have you with us today. Have you ever been to a great feast? A medieval feast? If not, we will be sharing with you today what it was like to attend a medieval feast. Why hold a feast? Do you and your family hold a large gathering and meal to celebrate a birthday, holiday, or other special occasion? I am sure that you do, and people in the Middle Ages did too, holding fancy meals called feasts on special occasions. Some of the feast celebration days included weddings, births and birthdays, funerals, and holy days such as Christmas, Easter, and Saints' days. Other occasions could include a royal visit. Whether you were rich or poor, you could hold a feast, but how grand the feast depended on your wealth and status. Feasts were also a way for a noble person to display their wealth and status to their friends. Today we will be discussing the most extravagant of feasts held by the wealthy. Who attended a great feast? Many people from various walks of life could attend a feast. Certainly royalty could host or attend a great feast, namely the king and queen, princes and princesses. Nobles, people with a title such as duke, baron, or earl, could host or attend a feast, along with his wife and members of his family. Knights were also able to attend, since they often held a noble title. Members of the church, such as priests and monks, were often invited, since feasts were sometimes held to celebrate religious holidays. On occasion, a table could be set for members of the peasantry to attend, which demonstrated the wealthy host's generosity to all. Unsavory types such as witches were not invited. Too bad. Feasts were often held in the great hall of a castle or grand country mansion. The walls were decorated with beautiful and colorful handmade tapestries, and occasionally with garlands and flowers as well. The tables were arranged in a U shape and were covered in fine linens. There was a head table or high table on a raised platform where the hosts and honored guests of the feast sat. Did you know that we still have a head table at banquets and weddings today? Diners sat along the outer edges of the tables, which helped the servers easily set food and drinks on the tables and allowed for entertainment to happen in the center of the room. In the picture on this slide, which comes from an actual medieval manuscript, you can see the tapestries on the walls, the linen-clad tables, and where the high table guests and other guests were seated. You can also see the servers entering the hall in a procession to deliver the food to the guests. What kinds of food and drink could you find at a medieval feast? Well, just about everything you can imagine. Meat was certainly the highlight of the event and was served during nearly every course of the meal. Fruits and vegetables were served, as well as cheeses, delicious savory and sweet pastries, and breads. Drinks generally consisted of wine, including a honey wine called mead, as well as ales. So you can find the same types of food at celebratory meals today, but they were prepared quite differently during the Middle Ages. A medieval feast often had many courses. 4 courses were fairly common, but some feasts had as many as 10 courses or more. Here we have a few courses that you could expect to find at a noble feast. In the first course, you could be served a royal potage, which is essentially a rich meat stew, along with pastries, a great custard, and sweet wine. Yes, you would often find dessert-type foods at the beginning of the meal. In the second course, there were soups, pies, jellies, and chestnuts. The third course was usually the most extravagant. In this course you could be served roasted great birds such as peacocks or swans, lovely roast beef and rabbits, along with yummy fritters. After dinner, or the last course, was essentially desserts of all kinds, including pastries, candied fruits and nuts, as well as spiced wine. It is important to note that breads were served throughout the meal to sop up all the yummy sauces, and the servers kept guests' goblets filled with wine and ale. What did the table setting at a medieval feast look like? Namely, what kinds of plates, bowls, and cutlery did guests have? Interestingly, guests were at times expected to bring their own cutlery. Guests were given a plate for their food, of course. The cutlery used included a knife for cutting meat, cheese, and bread, and a spoon for eating up all the lovely sauces that went with many of the foods served. Where is the fork, you ask? While the fork had been around since ancient times, it was mainly used in the kitchen for carving meat. The fork only started to be used for dining around the 16th century, but mainly in Italy. The fork only came to be widely used during the 18th century, just a few hundred years ago. For drinking, a simple cup or fine goblet was used. Also, hygiene was important during the meal, and guests were expected to wash their hands before and also during a meal, so a finger bowl with water to keep hands clean was also part of the table setting. Did you know that some feasts had taste testers? Essentially, these taste testers were servers who had to sample the food before giving it to the guests to make sure it wasn't poisoned. Sometimes taste testers were provided for all guests at a feast, but usually just for high-status guests like royalty and nobility. Wow! Since there were so many courses during a medieval feast, often entertainment was provided to keep the meal lively and the guests happy, in between the many courses and during the feast time overall. Entertainers at a feast included a lute player/singer who would sing ballads of love, heroes, and battles won. A jester was often on hand to provide jokes and tricks for making people laugh. Acrobats and dancers also gave the feast an air of extravagance and amazement. Are you curious to know what medieval foods tasted like? Here are a couple of recipes that we have prepared for you to try with your family at home. If you try one, send us a message and let us know what you think. Thank you so much for joining us for this introduction to medieval feasts. If you enjoyed this presentation, please check out our other lessons and activities on Ancient and Medieval Adventures Online.